Well, I'm just going to get things started because I don't want to take any time up away from this conversation that is, I'm sure, going to be inspiring and wonderful. So welcome to Past and Present with Allison Gilbert and Alica Forneret, who is the founder of the Dead's Moms Club. And she has been a wonderful collaborator of Reimagine over the years. My name is Derek Hosberg. I am the program director at Reimagine. We're a nonprofit organization that sparks community experiences just like this one that empower individuals, families, communities to face the hardest parts of our existence, including serious illness and death, while inspiring people to celebrate life and one another. And before we get started, I just wanted to first thank our past and present sponsor, Domani for Grief, for their support of this series. Thank you for helping, and thank you all for who've made donations. That also helps keep us going with all different types of programming like this one. Just briefly, I just wanted to make sure everybody's acclimated to Zoom. You can see all the instructions here. I also wanted to note, which actually is not shown in the slide, that if you want closed captioning, I've enabled live transcription, and you can just click that little CC at the bottom of your screen. And also, if you're finding the chat distracting, you're welcome to post comments and questions in the chat, but if it is distracting, you can always close it in the top right-hand corner. If you're having any technical issues, you can always write me, Dara, who you can select in the chat. If you want to just take a moment to share where you're zooming in from, that's always nice to see. And I just want to note that since most of us are calling in from the United States, please join us in acknowledging that we are on the traditional lands of multitudes of Indigenous peoples, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This land acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of colonialism. I'm located on Jicarilla, Apache and Pueblo land, and if you're curious about which Indigenous territory you're located on, I'm going to post a link in just a minute. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the wonderful Allison Gilbert, who is an Emmy award-winning journalist and really one of the most thought-provoking and influential writers on grief and resilience. She's the author of numerous books, including the groundbreaking Past and Present, Keeping Memories of Loved Ones Alive. And her stirring work exposes the secret and essential factor for harnessing loss to drive happiness and rebound from adversity. She serves on the board of directors of the National Alliance for Grieving Children and the advisory board for the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, the preeminent national organization providing grief support to families of America's fallen heroes. And with that, it is my pleasure to pass it off to Allison.
Hey everybody, I am so glad to see you. I've been watching the chat as Dara was making those lovely introductions, and I've been seeing where everyone is joining us from. And as always, I am blown away by the reach. This past and present conversation series is international. I saw Germany on the chat, I saw Canada, and I've of course been seeing places all over the country, from Texas to Virginia to New Mexico. I think I saw Florida and Illinois, and so, and of course, many other places, including where I am, which is New York. And our guest today, who I will introduce, is Alica Forneret, and she's actually in LA. So we have both coasts represented just with us. So hey, Alica.
Hi, Allison. Thank you.
It's so great to have you here today. And I want to go over a few housekeeping items that I think will keep this conversation impactful and also tidy, so we all know what to expect. Right now in New York, where I am, it's about 6 minutes after 1 p.m. We are going to be done on time. We will be out by 2 o'clock. Dara knows I am a strict adherer to your time. I know that this is a work day. Many of us are still homeschooling our kids. And so I know your time is precious. So don't worry. This will be done at 2. In addition, Reimagine is recording this conversation. And so if you do need to drop off, I don't want this to add stress. It will be recorded. We will send out a link. So just don't worry. Christina, who can wave, she's wearing a delicious kind of sherbety shirt, is going to be going through the chat during my conversation with Alica. And if you have questions for me, more importantly, really, for Alica Forneret, who I know you are all excited to hear from, please put your questions to her in the chat. What Christina will do is that she will go through them. She will find the themes that seem to be bubbling up to the top that represent most of the questions coming in. And so that way, what we are hoping to do is answer as many of your questions as possible. I will start taking those questions with Christina's help at about 1:40 or so Eastern time, so 10:40 for you on the West Coast. So that's it. That's the game plan. So I want to start, Alica, first by also thanking Domani for Grief for sponsoring this. If it wasn't for them, we would not be here. So I am thrilled to be a part of the Domani for Grief community. And I really want to start somewhere where I hadn't anticipated, Alica. So I'm putting you a little bit on the spot. I know we're getting to Mother's Day. There are many of us, including you and including me, who are celebrating and looking forward to Mother's Day without our moms. So I really do want to talk about that. But first, I was struck by something that you just published for the Huffington Post. And I want to read a quote. And I found it exceptionally urgent. So I'm going to read it. So forgive my eyes being diverted to my paper while I just don't get your quote incorrect. You said, for many people of color, the fear, exhaustion, and constant grief that all come from regularly dealing with various forms of discrimination are compounded when additional trauma piles on. So your piece for the Huffington Post really leads to my question, even in the title of your article. Your title was, How People of Color Can Experience Grief Differently Than White People. Provocative. I want to listen. Please help me understand how it's different before we launch into our Mother's Day conversation. How is grief for people of color so different, Alica?
Thank you, Allison. Great place to start. Happy you're ready to just jump into it this morning. This is a topic that I've been having conversations with some of the people that are here about. In general, people in the field that are people of color doing this work. And like you said, it is urgent, it is important, and it's important to me because as we navigate the world, we are burdened and impact. And thank you for sharing the link and talking to that, speaking to that, Dara. We are burdened in a way by things that are impacting us societally, economically, culturally, and experiencing trauma from just moving through the world as people of color that are traumatized on a regular basis. And when you put in the losses that we are seeing on the news every day, the impacts that it's having on our personal communities and the wider communities that we're a part of every day. And also when we are just consistently having conversations about people who look like us, people who speak like us, people who move through the world like us, being murdered on the street senselessly and violently, that is an extremely large amount of pressure, trauma, and really just burden to carry on a regular basis. The reason that I wrote the piece was because for the last year and a half, I have just been in spaces like this with the public and with people talking about this. And then I find myself in spaces with women of color, people of color, and professionals who work in the death care space that are having very different private conversations. And last year, the opportunity to speak with Alua Arthur, Oceana Sawyer, Lashana Williams, Naomi Edmondson, and Joel Anthony in the Saying It Louder panel that we did made it very clear that what we are experiencing moving through the world as death care professionals and just as humans is very, very different. And being able to talk to that publicly is great.
You've launched an entire course, I think called Shifting Death Care, which is about the end of life experiences for people of color. So you are really, by way of introduction to who you are, as opposed to reading your accolades, I'm just kind of peppering them into the conversation. You really are a leader in this space. And what struck me, and we will pivot, I promise, to Mother's Day in a moment, is that when I wrote a recent op-ed in the New York Times about grief and really calling on a national effort to confront what's happening because of COVID-19, but not only because of COVID-19, getting some federal response to this issue. What was really fascinating to me is one bit of information I was able to include, which is that, and it's from a professor, I hope I'm getting her name correct as I reflect upon it, Dembra Umberson in Texas. And what she talks about is that Black grief is specifically different. And here's why she says it's so different. She says Black individuals and families experience more grief than white families. And she also says that grief, that burden, starts earlier in the lifespan. So it's quantitatively more, and it's also more throughout and starts earlier. Are these numbers that you have been grappling with?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I hear earlier, I think intergenerational trauma that we've experienced and are carrying from our ancestors, from our lineage, and from people before us that is stored physically in our bodies and part of the stories that we hear, we grow up learning about. So yes, like younger in general, the things that we're exposed to are different. But when I think about the time that the grief experience in my life and my family and generations is really building up beyond when I was like birthed into the world. So yeah, absolutely.
So I am going to pivot now. So warning, pivot coming, Alisa.
Hard pivot.
I know we go on with this forever. And I do want to say before we go forward, I'm sure everyone who is hearing you right now and who are going to be watching this video in the future would want to connect with you. So I want to pause and just say you are at Alisa Forneret on Twitter, you're Alisa.Forneret on Instagram, and your Facebook page. All right, I'm going to say it. Grief is hard AF, and that's your Facebook handle. So just if you want to continue the conversation with Alisa, but I do want to pivot now to Mother's Day. You lost your mom in a very similar time frame, actually, than I did. I was also in my 20s. You were 27, and you lost your mom very suddenly. And shockingly, if I think you're okay with me mentioning this, because I know I asked permission before I did, from a fall at your sister's wedding. So can you explain what happened? And this, I believe, happened in 2016, and welcome us into your life as a young woman who has lost your mom.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you. I have to say, as someone being interviewed and invited into conversation, getting that email from you asking for permission to talk about this intimate detail of my experience was really wonderful. And I'm really grateful for that. I also share about this stuff publicly everywhere all the time. So I was like, yes, Allison, let's talk. But thank you. So in 2016, my sister got married I think it was the last weekend of September, and it was in our hometown of Riverside, and it was beautiful wedding. Late in the evening though, my mom was walking outside, slipped, fell, ended up in an ambulance, rushed to the hospital, and was in the emergency room. She was there for a couple days, got out, and then ended up having some complications due to that fall, went back into the ICU. And then about a week after she went back into the ICU, she died. One note as well is that 2 days after my sister's wedding, my now husband and I actually got on a plane and moved to Scotland. So I got the call from my dad the weekend that she had went back into the ICU, and he said, you know, my dad had always said to me, he said, I travel a lot, I move around a lot. And he said, my mom's sick all the time. And he said, if I ever need you to come home because it's time and it's bad enough, I will call you and tell you that it's time. And that week was the time that my dad called and said, this is the time. This is not a short-lived thing. She will not make it out of this. You need to come home and say goodbye. So I flew back from Scotland like 3 or 4 days after we landed there. And yeah, I think I got back on a Sunday and she passed by the Wednesday.
I'm really sorry. And I know from talking to you in the past, like so many of us who choose to go professionally into this grief space, it really is the pivot point that you decided to make this a part of your professional world, that you were not seeing the kind of support that you needed for someone who was young, perhaps as a person of color, but I'm not sure if that's a part of the discussion yet. But certainly as someone who was young and in need of information, you tooled around online. And at that moment in 2016, you saw a vacuum and you were not getting the support that you needed as someone who had just lost her mom.
Yeah, I felt a lot of the feelings and emotions that weren't talked about in a lot of the stuff that shows up at the top of Google. And I also was like expressing myself through language and feeling a lot of things that were like, I wanted to curse, I wanted to yell, I wanted to be confused. And I think that a lot of what I was finding at the time was really about things. You go through the stages, it's linear, you'll feel crappy for a while, eventually you'll feel okay, recovery, doves, angels, recovery. And that was not aligning with me and the experience that I was having.
I know for sure that when my mother died, there was no social media. There wasn't even like, really any sort of community. It was 1996. It's a long time. I'm approaching 25 years without my mom. And I wonder for communities like Reimagine, Damani for Grief has a new community page on Facebook. Do these types of, even though it's virtual, can you find your people? Meaning that is there support and validation and other people to yell and scream and cry with, even if you'll never meet them? So is that part of the beauty about sharing and coming together? I know on COVID, there's really very little other opportunities, but even when things go back to normal, is there a place that you find to be incredibly healing about these virtual spaces?
Absolutely. It is, like you said in the beginning of this call, the reach and the variety of people that I can have conversations with and could have conversations with in the beginning online was astounding to me. The fact that I didn't have to find people that I could access in person, face to face, who would have a conversation with me about something that was intimate, like the fact that I could find that online was incredible. And I think one of the first places that I found it was with Modern Loss and with Reimagine. And as a professional in this space who creates those types of spaces now, I know that there is so much value in it, especially for people who don't have someone to walk out of their office, lean on and cry to any day of the week. And I think that being able to find that connection, those resources, and other people who will listen, or who, as someone said here, your story resonates with me. it's amazing. We've never met. And the fact that we have an experience that's been similar, and that we can sort of meet in the middle on is just incredible.
I want to talk about maybe what happened for you over months, perhaps it took years, which is the wonderful and heart-opening experience that may happen, that could happen for many people who've gone through the loss of their moms or any loved one, which is the appreciation of what we can carry forward, of what our loved ones said to us, what they embodied. And for this, I went trolling around the web, Alisa, for things that you have said. I've done a little bit of homework, and I wanted to read back again, looking at my notes for something that you've said about your mom, whose name, by the way, is Deborah, and we should say her name out loud. Alisa's mom's name is Deborah. So you had said that she embraced creativity, and it made it possible for you, my friend, to express yourself in many different ways. And you said about your mom, Deborah, she talked with anyone, anywhere. And so I'm wondering, as you get ready for Mother's Day without your mom, what does hearing that back to you, how does it strike you? And how are you planning to kind of acknowledge that relationship that you still have with your mom?
Hearing it back, makes me really emotional and really grateful and really, I think, just tender. Um, so I'm just moved back this weekend to my hometown, where my mom and dad adopted me, raised me, and then eventually let me fly. And I moved around a lot, but my husband and I just moved back into our home. And I'm in a place right now where I feel a connection to her, I think, because I've physically landed in a place that has a lot of memories attached to her. And specifically, the piece that stuck out for me in what you just read is, so my mom, yeah, my mom was like the person at the grocery store where if you're in line with them, they're like looking in your car, like, oh, what are you going to cook with that? Oh, what recipe are you going to use for that? I've never had that before. What is that fruit? Like, that was my mom. That's me too. And I have been thinking about this a lot because I'll start going to the grocery store again where my mom was that person. And at her funeral, family showed up, friends showed up, and so many just random people showed up that said, oh, I met your mom in the line at the grocery store. I met your mom while we were waiting for lab results at the hospital. Or I met your mom at the dog groomer and I found out through the grapevine that she died and I wanted to come. And I think that just hearing that back, I'm like, oh, I'm sitting in a place where I get to experience those memories again and probably like turn a little bit into her and like embody her again here, which is really beautiful.
I want to stop you there because I want to take a part of what you said and then tease it out a little bit. Not all of us have the good fortune, and you are so blessed to be able to go back to the community that is so connected to your mom. And I'm going to put you on the spot. For those of us who are not near where that location that kind of is that tether, how can we learn from you about keeping our mother's memory alive, especially as these days can feel so awful when you see moms and daughters together potentially, or moms and their sons together, or the FTD and 1-800-Flower ads. What's your advice?
Yeah, I can speak to what I have done over the years since I left home and since she died. I do a couple of things that I would recommend depending on how people interact with their physical surroundings. I keep and have moved for many years, many physical reminders of my mom, small, large, whatever it is that I keep around me. And one of the things my therapist said to me a couple years ago when I was in Vancouver was, they don't have to be things like pictures where everyone else can come up and remind you and comment and blah, 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 blah. But for me, it's been like a little rock or a little stone or something that I keep, and I know that it's important to me and it gives me the memories that I need to have without having to have a conversation with someone. And on the flip side, if people enjoy commemorating their person, whoever it is, their mom, their caregiver, their whoever it is, doing what we're doing in the chat right now, which is talking about them, telling stories to people who will listen, good or bad, when you need to express something about your person. That's what's helped me be able to keep her memory alive, because I just talk about her, and I talk about her casually with people. And the last thing I'll say is I definitely have made it clear to people like my husband and my friends, my really close friends, that when they have a memory or they have something to share about my mom, like my husband says all the time, he's like, that's your mom in you. Like, oh my gosh, that was your mom, come now. And it's giving someone permission in my life to do that is really, really special, and doesn't put the pressure on me to be the one bringing her up all the time, but she stays present.
There's a thread that I am hearing as you're talking, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly. And if I am, I want to take a yellow highlighter to it, which is that when you say you proactively tell your husband or others to share stories when they think of them, you've taken control, you've taken some sort of action. When you share a story yourself, you've made a choice, you've made a decision to do that, to share those memories. You talked about objects that may be, not the most common, I think you mentioned a rock that, or a stone, that again takes a certain amount of agency. You've decided to, keep that object for a specific reason, almost like a talisman, that keeps you connected to your mom. And the thread that I see, and what I truly believe in, and it's why I wrote my book, Past and Present, Keeping Memories of Loved Ones Alive, is that keeping is a verb. Keeping requires action. And what you're doing also requires action. And I wonder if you can speak to the following. Does passivity and not choosing to take ownership of legacy, does that somehow stir resentment or sadness or anger? And is there a lesson in healing from doing what you have done, Alica, which is taking control over remembering?
I honestly, truly believe that if someone like me has the ability to choose to remember my mom, that's what's best for me. And if another person has the ability to choose to, after their mom dies, never talk about them again, never engage with them again, and for some people, hopefully for them, never have to bring up memories or think about them again, that's what's potentially best for them. I think that passivity and not actively digging into a relationship that could have been incredibly traumatic, incredibly painful, and also just not important to some people is absolutely fine. I think, like you said, my relationship with my mom was complicated. And when I reflect now, there's a lot of beautiful things about it, and there's some challenging things about it. But I think that there are many people who don't have relationships with their mom at all, and not engaging with that loss. If it's safe for you, then, I don't know, in the most informal way, do you?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that the choice of not doing anything is clearly also a choice. And I guess that's what I was going through, that there is some acknowledgement that you can kind of choose your direction. And that's a good path, especially when you're talking about complicated grief. I completely 100% agree. I want to talk about something else that I've read that I was really heartened by, and I could also share my story that is very similar. That loss had an unexpected upside for you, and often that doesn't get a lot of play, right? The things that happen that are so good um, because of loss, and not that you wish the loss happened. It's just because things happen and it's not a choice. Things can happen that are good because of a loss, and things that can happen that, of course, gut us because of loss. And for you and me, and I'll share my story too, the loss of your mom brought you and your dad closer. And so I want to talk about how grief can also open you up for other, right? For other experiences, other relationships that may not have shown up otherwise.
Yeah, I it's I want to say, like, I would never have had the relationship that I have with my dad if my mom hadn't died. Technically, I'm sure it could have been possible that we would have been closer, but opening up about things like grief and the death of my mom and things that happened in the past that impacted me, that my dad and I needed to have conversations about, would not have happened if it wasn't triggered by the death of my mom. And I think there's a lot of positive to the way that our relationship has developed and bloomed. And I think that there's also a lot of positive in not just the relationship between the two of us, but the growth that I needed to do and the growing that I needed to do to, like, be an adult, be a respectful daughter, and be an open daughter, was a huge opportunity for me after my mom died, and a piece of development that I think came out of this that has made me, and hopefully my dad would agree, a better and more thoughtful and kind person and child in general.
I feel like I have a very different relationship for sure with my stepmother. After both of my parents died, I had hung on to anger towards my stepmother on behalf of my mother. So I was like taking the baton of her anger and not allowing myself to be close to my stepmom, even though my mother was gone. I felt that somehow I was carrying that torch. And so for me, after both of my parents died and my stepmother outlived both of them, she's been a gift to me. And to have my own relationship with her has been my gift, from the deaths of my mom and my dad. Alisa, I want to talk about, you're doing a very special 2-month long event, and it kicks off Mother's Day weekend. And it's interesting, you talk about it being on, for anyone who's lost a caregiver in their life, which is not necessarily mothers, right? So in honoring of the caregivers in our life, and it's 2 months long. What are you going to do over 2 months, and how can people who are hearing this be involved and feel supported by what you have going on?
Thank you for mentioning. So just for some context, 2019, I hosted an event in Vancouver called Motherless Mother's Day, and it was wild. It was pre-pandemic, so it was extra wild, but it was me getting together through my business, with a bunch of people that just needed something to do Mother's Day weekend that wasn't sitting around being sad, or just like looking at all of the ads that pop up on your phone all day, like you said, for flowers and go buy your mom a gift. And so we spent an entire day over Mother's Day weekend. We like got massages while we were doing yoga. We ate food, we had drinks, we made candles, we journaled. And that really, to me, was the beginning of recognizing that community piece and what it means to be in community with other people around these really hard, particularly hard days, and also what it means to like allow ourselves to be taken care of on those days. So fast forward to 2020 pandemic, I moved it virtually with Reimagine last year. We hosted 33 events in 3 days. It was out of control. It was amazing. It was beautiful, but I'm still tired from last year. And we worked with a lot of different partners and professionals in the death care space, and mainly did a bunch of Zoom events. This year, caregiving, my goal this year, there's a couple of them. The first being Mother's Day is not just hard for people whose moms are dead. It's hard for people whose dads are dead. It's hard for people whose caregivers in many different senses are dead, for people who have acted as a mother figure for them. So we're making it more expansive this year, which is key. And then I'm also spreading it out over 2 months, because I'm still tired from last year, and because the support that we need doesn't just fall on that weekend. Like, I still miss my mom the Monday after Mother's Day. I still miss my mom and find Father's Day challenging when I worry about my dad or think about my dad. And so really this expansiveness was exciting for me, and we'll be hosting live events. And also the final sort of switch that we're making this year is specifically around getting people off Zoom. So we'll be hosting some live events that'll happen Mother's Day and Father's Day weekend, but I have completely shifted the types of content that we'll be creating. So there's written content. I'm doing my first audio project with a bunch of leaders in the space. We're doing cooking and like dinners together. And then we're also going to be mailing at the end of it tangible materials to people so that they can manage their grief away from a computer and away from their phones.
I love that. And so if folks want to find out, just go to your website, alicaforneret.com, or social media. Is that what they would do if they wanted to sign up?
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. The link is in the chat now, but yeah, you can head to my website, and there's all the information about registering on there.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to bring in Christina at this point to go through some of the chat, help us out with some of the questions that have been kind of percolating to the top. And then when we've about 6 minutes left to go until we near the end, I'm going to come back, Alisa, with some lightning round questions for you, and then we will wrap it up, I promise, on time. So Christina, can you help us go through the chat and let us know if there are questions for either Alisa or for me? And I can't wait to hear what's on everyone's mind.
Sure, I got a few private questions. So the first one is, how did you find a balance between caring for yourself and caring for your other family members, like your sister and dad?
Thank you for asking. It's been a journey. I will say with my sister, we process our grief very differently and we're definitely not like a Gilmore Girls-y type relationship. And so we've talked about it openly when we've needed to. And one of the beautiful things too that I think has been really good about it is that my husband and her husband, like, we are close. And so when care needs to be given, it's available, whether it's through us communicating or the people in our lives taking care of us. And with my dad, I would say finding the balance. I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, and maybe Allison, like, you can speak to this in different kinds of grief relationships that you manage, but there's definitely times where I allow my anxiety and my stress about my dad to overshadow my own grief so that I don't have to deal with it, which means that there is an imbalance. It means that I'm not dealing with my own stuff and just being worried about him or stressing about him or imposing my stress and my grief on him. And the way that I've managed that really is to make sure that I make time for myself and make spaces for myself to make sure that I'm tended to. Because when that starts to drop off, it means that I'm just, especially being a professional in this space, just like focus on everyone else around me and deal with my stuff last.
I very much believe, and this was hard for me to get right away, that even though, and I'm not speaking out of turn because I've told this straight up to my brother before, it's just the two of us. And for the longest time, I was not getting what I needed from him.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me feel all sorts of lonely. And what I learned over time is that it's okay for me to get the kind of support I need elsewhere. And it's not because my brother didn't miss our parents equally. It's just he processes loss differently. And as we've said, that's okay. So to me, relying on communities like Reimagine or leaning heavily on a Facebook group like the Damani for Grief community page as an example, helps people who, even if they have close family, and that's lucky, right? I'm lucky to have a brother who I love, but that doesn't mean that he's giving me what I need in this space. And so I feel like going to strangers sometimes can be more healing if that's what you need. And so allowing yourself to compartmentalize where you get what for what you need on a certain day. So Christina, help us with another question.
Okay, another anonymous question. It says, I have trouble bringing my mom up in conversations. I feel like everyone thinks I should be over it by now. Do you have any suggestions on how to bring her up without annoying people?
I mean, personally, and I can speak to this, yeah, from my experience, I have made a point to, even if it's one person or two people or the internet, to figure out where the safe spaces are, who I can have the conversations with. And those people don't get annoyed. Those people aren't feeling like I'm a burden. I've found similar to what we were saying earlier, like the internet, groups like this, just this chat alone, people are ready to talk about our moms. People are ready to talk about our loss. And finding those spaces, to me, has to be at times a replacement for the people in our life that are just not going to show up. And I think that putting up boundaries between people who are going to make you feel bad about bringing up a person that you've lost and want to talk about, like finding an alternative to that if you can, whether it's here or somewhere else or with a professional, if you have access to that. And that's a lot of the work I do. If you need access to stuff like that, get in touch with me. I will help navigate these spaces for you. Really, that replacement for the people in your personal life, even for a little while, can be okay.
You know, it's interesting. I agree with everything that you just said, Alisa. And I would say this just happened. So the other day on my author Facebook page, I posted I posted a picture of my mom and me when I was really, really young. I think it was a picture when she visited me at sleepaway camp during the summer. And I posted a question like, you know, how many years has it been since your mom died? And I said, for me, it's been 25 years. You know, the response was like 100 plus and counting comments of people writing down for everyone to talk about and see their mom's names in some cases, how many years it's been in all cases. And then some people posted photographs of their moms to go along with their post. If you want to see this, it's shocking to me. I've been talking about loss and grief for a really long time, and I guess I never posed the question in quite this way before. So note to self in the future about what people really want to talk about. So on my author page, you'll see this, and I think there really is no magic to the question. I think the magic comes from just the space and knowing that it's not from maybe the people who you already know. And so that's why those spaces, I think, can be so healing, because then you don't have to worry about permission, right? Like it's not permission from your family that you're seeking. So Christina, I know we're on a tight deadline and I have a lightning round for Elisa, but let's get in a few more questions.
Sure. What advice do you have for motherless mothers who are raising their children without support of their mothers?
I can speak to resources that I've found and people that I've worked with. As a person who doesn't have kids yet, I cannot speak directly to that experience, but what I will say is that there are so many incredible resources out there in many different formats, whether it's groups, books. I actually have, which I'll put on that are on my website right now, some videos from Mother's Day last year. I hosted a panel with Hope Edelman, Claire Bidwell Smith, Megan Carmichael, and Motherless Mothers, the book that's in the chat right now, and Susan Liu, about what the experience is like navigating having a child after you've lost your mother. And I think leaning on resources like that from people who can speak to their own experience with it, and research and resources and conversations with many mothers that they've talked to, that is the best advice that I could give. And I will say, I posted on my Instagram the other day a quote from Megan from that talk last year that really struck me when I was looking through the transcript. And what she was reminding people of is, you are also a child, you were a child to someone, and it doesn't mean that just because you need to take care of your kid that you have all the answers. And I think that reminder is something that's going to be really helpful for me long term, if and when I have kids, is that there's things that I'm just not going to be able to answer or navigate with them, and that's okay. But Allison,
Yeah, I see there's a in the chat, Vivian said, can I also speak about raising kids? Yes, this is my life. So I feel so well positioned to share some answers. Clearly, I do not have them all, but this has been my life's work. So if you want to see a few books first, Always Too Soon is one of my books about the experience of losing both parents. There are wonderful collections of interviews that I did, many with parents who are navigating raising children without their own moms and dads to lean on. So that book is Always Too Soon. Recommend it. I also wrote a book called Parentless Parents, and that is specifically about the experience of raising kids, my kids, all of our kids, without the benefit of my parents being alive, for me to ask them questions, specific questions, questions about our family traditions, questions about genealogy. It matters. For example, when I, started teething or crawling or walking, these things are actually hereditary, like the basic timeline of when these things happen. And so it's not just relying on parenting magazines or parenting books. That's not a replacement for your own parents, because so much of it is specific to your DNA, which is fascinating to me. I also spoke a lot about, in Parentless Parents, about what this does to a marriage. When one spouse has his or her parents and the other spouse doesn't have his or her parents, there really is an upset of a power dynamic about which family structure gets kind of like headline status in the home, and which traditions move forward and which value set moves forward. So those are all things that you can read. And of course, my latest book, Past and Present, is really all about, there are 85 ideas for how to remember our loved ones with creativity, using all of our senses from cooking to music to tastes and smells and what we feel and what we can experience with our kids. But the first thing I'll say, and really the last thing I'll say on this, because I know we only have 9 minutes left, here's my number one tip. And I hope this makes sense in the time that we have. Whenever I talk about my mom and dad to my children, as much as I can, I never say my mom or my dad. What I instead try to do is say your grandma and your grandpa. Because when you can orient conversations with your children around their relationships to that loved one, they own those stories differently. It becomes their story about their grandmother or their story about their grandfather. So that is the one tip that I guess I have time for right now that's specific. It's free. It just takes a little bit of effort. So Christina, one more question for Elisa, then I go into my lightning round.
Sure. How do you handle exciting life events that make you sad because your mom isn't there? My wedding day was hard for me.
I cry a lot. I just cry a lot. I let myself cry. Buying a house last year, my mom would have been out of control, excited, screaming, running through the house, like hands in the air. And I didn't get that. And I let myself be sad about it. And then one of the things that I did was put things of hers up in the home, these pictures I have on the wall in my office. I brought her in to this experience and into the moment of creating this home and nesting in it without her. So I brought her in and I let myself be really sad. Yeah.
Yeah, allowing yourself to be sad is a legit response, right? I think carving out time to be sad is completely appropriate. I have an idea in the book Past and Present called Giving Grief 100%. And that means not pushing it away, not saving it for when, you're multitasking, but literally setting aside time to let yourself be in that tough space. I think that actually is freeing for when you're trying to do more than one thing, because you're kind of giving it its full energy, I think, and that's important to do. All right, Alisa, what is the Starlight Lab?
Oh, exciting. So I am working with the Summit Foundation and Round Glass right now to launch a lab specifically focused on enhancing the death and dying experience for people of color in America. And I'm working with a lot of professionals and fellows and various organizations to start doing research, doing a learning collective and a leadership program for people of color that work in this space. So there will be lots more information about that coming out soon.
That's fantastic. And I think probably maybe the first of its kind, or no?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I'm excited about that.
So there's another reason for your move back to LA, or maybe it's not the reason, but it's going to be the seed of something that you're hoping to build in the physical realm in Los Angeles, which is extraordinary. What are you building in LA, Alisa?
Yeah, I'm in the process right now of developing and fundraising a brick and mortar grief center in Los Angeles, which, yes, is definitely part of my move back to land in California and serve the community that I grew up in.
So we have 4 minutes left. What I want to do is, first of all, thank Reimagine. I am so in awe of the platform that you have built to allow these kind of conversations to gain the kind of audience that we have here today. It's rich, It's meaningful, and I am grateful to Reimagine. I also want to thank Domani for Grief. We've talked before about the importance of community. Reimagine is a community. Domani for Grief has a brand new Facebook community page. I highly recommend that you take a look. I am on there often, and I am appreciative of it for sure. To remind you, Alica is all over the web. She's on Facebook, she's on Instagram, and she's on Twitter. Of course, her website is alicaforneret.com, and you could find out about her 2-week-long extravaganza for caregivers that's launching Mother's Day weekend. If you want to get in touch with me, you of course can, AllisonGilbert.com. I'm on social media too under A Gilbert Writer. And the last question I want to give is to Christina. Is there a question now in the chat before we go? Maybe 1 or 2 last minute questions in our last 3 minutes that we can ask Alica.
I don't have any more questions, but I just want to remind everyone that we will share all of these links in the email that you'll receive tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. Oh, good. Well, then I can ask one more question then that I was saving, but that's great. So in 2 minutes left, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, sum it down for us. Many of us are going back into the workplace soon. Alica, I know you are one of the preeminent experts on grief in the workplace. I'm putting you on the spot in 2 minutes. Give us maybe 2 tips. We are grieving, we're going back to work in person. How do we do that? How can we maintain strength?
As an individual and an employee, recognizing where your boundaries and your limits are and figuring out who at your organization will help you keep them. Boundaries, limits, capacity when we're expected to go back to work and just function as we have been pre-COVID is unacceptable and unrealistic for many people of color, people who are caregivers and parents. The burdens that we are experiencing while also having to show up on Zoom like this for 8 hours a day is unrealistic. And for managers, and I want to speak to just really quickly to managers and leadership, be realistic about what you're asking of people and understand that most people are bringing their grief to work these days. I've written a couple articles about this. There's in GQ and in a couple other publications. So those are on my website, and really taking care of your people while they're showing up at work with their grief, which you cannot check at the door, is incredibly important right now.
I love that. And thank you for suggesting those resources. I saw, see, I'm from New York. I saw on the chat that the Dougie Center also put a link to other resources too. So if you are grieving right now and you are expected to go back into an office physically soon, I suggest that you check out the resources on Alica's website. It looks like the Dougie Center has some important resources as well. And so, as I promised, it is the strike of 2 o'clock here in New York and 11 o'clock where Alica is in California. So on behalf of Reimagine and Domani for Grief, I just want to say I am touched that you chose to spend this hour with us. I hope that it was helpful. And don't forget, the last Thursday of every month, we will be back here with the next installment of this past and present conversation series. So Christina, thank you. Dara, thank you. And Alica, I'm so blessed to have spent this hour with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Dara and Christina.
Bye, everybody.